Hello, everybody. It's Nicole again, and today on our author spotlight, sponsored by the Beyond the Book Festival and the Horror Writers Association, we're going to be talking to Damian Serbu. He is part of the Horror Writers Association, the Chicago chapter, and he is also the author of the Realm of the Vampire Council series. Hi, Damian.
Hello.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
Um,
you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for being on here. Just to remind you guys, the Beyond the Book Festival is being held by the Stark County Public Library in Knox, Indiana, and it's on September 30th of this year, 2023, and it's from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Time. So hope to see everybody there. Damia, I'm going to ask you a few questions. We're going to kind of keep this casual and see how it goes, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. Um, and my notes are backwards. I apologize. Nope, they're not. Okay, it's me. All right. So when I was doing research for this interview, I found a couple of different bios for you. I loved this one. I'm going to quote it. It says, Damian Serbu lives in Chicagoland with his partner and dogs. The dogs control his life, tell him what to write, and threaten to eat him in the middle of the night if he disobeys. So that was hilarious. So a question, are the dogs still controlling your life?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They always do. If it's when we're going to go out, when we're going to eat, yeah, they pretty much run the show around here. Paul and I like to tell people we're just kind of renting from them. We're the staff and we're supposed to meet their needs.
I'm telling you, that's how it
Funny
goes when
because
you have pets.
it is, and because of COVID, well, one of them's a puppy, so maybe not him, but Chewbacca, who's the older dog, they got used to like us being around. And so now that you're inching back into the real world and everything, he kind of looks around like, no, you don't leave unless I let you leave. Like, what's going on here? So yeah, you think as a writer, you're at home. You have time for creativity, you pick and choose when you're doing what, but no, I have to work around their schedule, definitely.
Oh yeah, and they let you know if you're not.
Oh yeah.
That's
I'm
so funny.
surprised, like maybe at some point they'll show you anytime I really need them to be quiet, that's when they'll decide to bark.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, I get it. How funny. I had a dog named Chewbacca too. She was a
Oh.
Dalmatian. Funny. But no, and you're right. They don't like to listen. I also saw in your bio that you are a gay horror writer, and that you also do speculative fiction. Can
Mhm.
you explain what speculative fiction is?
Maybe I think that's one of the hard things to define, but that's why I use it. It's actually on purpose a little bit. My take on it, and again, if you talked to 10 different authors who identify as speculative fiction authors, you'd probably get 10 different answers. But it used to be that everybody pigeonholed authors into more like into broader categories. And so like a lot of people were lumped into horror, and they were horror-ish, but maybe not hardcore horror. My hero, my favorite author ever was Anne Rice. And
Mm.
so when I was like 80s, 90s, you'd go to the horror section to find her. But if you read Anne Rice, she's not horror I mean, a lot of people think horror, that's like Stephen King, like scare the crap out of stuff, right? So, and I like that too, but Anne Rice, I would not put in that category. She can be creepy and frightening, but there's also a lot of other stuff going on. So, my take on speculative fiction is more of a category that says it can have elements of horror, but it maybe isn't absolutely horrific. It could be that you're playing around with goblins or you're playing around with fairies, and some of them are scary and some of them are attacking people, but sometimes they're just like, they have human emotion because obviously writers are writing all of this. So it runs a gamut of fantasy world, elements of fear, elements of horror, but it's not so rigidly defined. Again, I think horror is more of a visceral, tangible fear kind of thing. Speculative fiction to me is a little broader, not quite as intense. And yeah, that's why I define myself that way.
That yeah, I know because there's always that I discussed this with a couple of other authors, that there's so many subgenres of horror. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are getting like chopped up or you know,
Nothing wrong
mass
with
murders or
that
anything like
anymore.
that, but it could be, yeah, mysteries you know, but then, you know, and again, you have like vampires and werewolves and Frankensteins and all this stuff. You have like, you know, the old genre stuff, but um, I guess, like I said, it's just this wide scheme of things. So I guess you could technically say instead of subgenre of horror, it's more speculative fiction. That makes sense. And I didn't know. I mean, I guess I could have Googled it, but I figured I'd ask your opinion on it. But no,
Yeah,
I like that definition. I
like I
do.
said, I think if you Googled it and asked other people, they'd have a different nuance to it too. That's kind
It,
of fun though. People can pick and choose their category of writing and how they want it to come out, and maybe not trying to conform to certain industry standards or
right. No, yeah, it's like a big melting pot in a sense, like a Heinz 57 of
yeah.
just a little bit of
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, definitely.
When I was reading, there was an interview on the Chicago Horror Writers, not the Chicago, the Horror Writers Association itself. There was an interview that you had done. The interview was called a Point of Pride interview with Damian Serbu. There was a quote on there that I just thought was absolutely wonderful. I want to quote that to you, and I kind of want to get your, I mean, at least let you know that I appreciate what you wrote. It says, horror teaches us about the darkness in the world and why it comes after innocent people. However, regarding myself and a lesson horror taught, I also see it as a way to find hope. If characters can overcome the worst monster imaginable, then there is hope and a way to strive for equality and a better world for all of us. In examining what we're afraid of, we can learn how to live better in an actual world by confronting our fears. So I thought that was just, it's an amazing quote. So thank you for writing that.
Sure.
I think that's a great definition of why people do read that genre. Um, so, have you always been a fan of horror?
I have. I mean, maybe, yeah, I think I probably always have. But, I've told people this before in other interviews, but back to like when I was young and we'd watch The Wizard of Oz, I loved The Wicked Witch of the West. I was so like everybody else is like, what do you mean you like the Wicked Witch? Like she's the villain in the whole thing. I'm like, no, she's so cool. And my sister and I used to play Flying Monkey, like the flying monkeys in the Wizard of Oz. I don't think you're supposed to completely identify with them, although they seem maybe like they're enslaved there or something. Anyway, so yeah, I was kind of drawn to that when I was younger, when Star Wars was coming out, to date myself. So I was like a big fan of Darth Vader. And then by junior high school, I started to like dabble in horror. For us, it was the era when cable television was starting, and so you
Mhm.
could sneak at night and watch like Halloween when they came on HBO. And I was like, oh, this is scaring the crap out of me. And I love it. So, yeah, there's always been a part of me that liked horror and exploring those ideas and the concept of the monster and why is the monster monstrous and what's going
Right.
on. How do you
Right.
overcome, you know?
Oh yeah. No, that it's great stuff. So uh, you mentioned the movies, but was there a book that like literally said, "Hey, you know, when you read it, you're like, I just got I love reading horror. I love it." So was there a book that just like turned you on definitely to the whole genre?
The first horror book I read was Stephen King's Christine.
Mm,
And we had a paperback used bookstore in town, and you could go trade books in and stuff. So I just went, and I don't even remember why I selected it. It could have been that I was watching the movies, so it kind of appealed to me. In my other life, I'm a history professor, so I was pretty staunchly reading nonfiction. I didn't read a lot of fiction at all. Um, Horror as a movie or TV or whatever was just a recreational kind of thing. But for some reason, Christine ended up in my stack of books. And it was like what I just described. I read it and it was like, oh, this is going to keep me up at night. Like this is really scaring me. But it was like in a really fun way, I think. And that's one of the things horror does, is it can scare you, it can give you a thrill. It's kind of like a roller coaster, but you're holding the book in your hand, so you feel safe for the
Right,
most part.
right.
You don't think that some like angry car or angry person's gonna come flying through the window and get you. So that was the first time that I can recall that I read a story that was about horror. And then after that, and that was long around junior high going into high school. So again, I was really focused career-wise on history, but that could keep me up at night because I'm thinking about the history, processing it. And so I needed something that was just fun and relaxing. And people are like, so you picked horror of all things? I'm like, yeah, like horror was always attractive to me then because I knew it wasn't true. I didn't have to try to remember the dates and the people and process it and think about why would people do that to each other. It was just fun to read it. So yeah, it was Stephen King, who, I like Stephen King. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan, but I enjoy reading his most recent book, Fairy Tale. I loved. It was one of my favorite Stephen King's ever, because sometimes his are long and like, oh my God, Stephen, get to the point. But
Right.
but anyway, so yeah, Christine introduced me to the genre. That was the
That,
first.
yeah, no, that's a great book. I actually I am a big Stephen King fan myself, and I had read that book recently. I'd never read it before, and it's a lot of the stuff that he had written in the early 80s to late 80s. Um, it's all, yes, it's horror, but it's beautifully written. It really is. I really appreciate a lot of his the way he writes. He can, yeah, somebody's hands going into the garbage disposal, but he writes it beautifully.
Well, again, because of the stereotypes that people think about horror, and King in particular, they focus on the really intense fear that he can generate, and the frightening monsters and the scares and stuff. And if you haven't read him and you don't understand it, he does beautiful character development long before you get to those intensely scary moments. You have like bought into this point of view, these people, and you want them to survive and you want to protect them. And a lot of times he's taking people, and you're seeing their growing up process, right, from childhood into young adulthood, and he's really beautiful at that, and it's an important part of his books. But again, people don't talk about that so much because it's about something jumping out at you and scaring you.
Right, right. No, and that's one thing that I noticed too, because I had read one of your short stories. Yes, it was about vampires. Yes, it was about horror, but it was really written beautifully. I have to hand it to you. I did enjoy reading it. And I love we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but that's what kind of when I touch base on that, I kind of think that I refer that to you because you do the same thing. You do write beautifully. I mean, yes, like again, it's horror, but it's something that I can appreciate. So it was a nice story. I liked it, and I like the meaning behind it. So yeah, it was awesome. But anyways, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
all right, pause, fast forward. So okay, if you since you've mentioned Stephen King and the book that just that made you turn you into horror, I'm kind of going to go another way with that. What was the book that you read that just made you think, I'm going to start writing horror? So was there a book or an author that you had read that just said, you know what, I can do this. I'm just going to start doing this.
Yeah, my favorite author all time is Anne Rice. I just loved Anne Rice, and I was introduced to her by a friend in college who knew that I loved vampires, and I had come out by that point, so we were gay. And he just mentioned in something about Anne Rice in passing, and I said, "Who's that? I haven't read anything by her." And he was like dumbfounded that I had never read Anne Rice, and he's like, "You have to read Anne Rice." Now, this is like the dark ages compared to today.
Right.
So if you were a horror fan when I was like in the early 90s coming out and everything, it's not like there were a lot of gay horror writers or stories with even gay characters in them. So Rice was one of the few writers that was playing around with sexuality. She's not necessarily overtly gay characters, but she definitely pushed the edge with sexuality and stuff. So I read Interview with the Vampire first, and then I was hooked. Like, just every time she came out with a book, I had to read it immediately. And that became, I mentioned earlier that I read the horror and stuff as a release, as to relax myself. And then I went to graduate school for history, and more, it was just, I needed some kind of hobby or recreation or something that was outside of history, concrete facts, outside of the stress of being judged every time you wrote something, and, oh, am I going to pass this, or what's going to happen here? And I had started to have, well, now I understand from a young age, I had stories rumbling around in my head. It had never occurred to me that I would ever put those onto paper for other people to read. But I started to do it as a hobby, as I need an hour of just stress release by myself. So I'm just going to write this thing, and not intending or envisioning that it was ever going to be published or anything. It was just fun at first. And then one thing led to another. So reading Rice, wanting an escapism kind of thing during graduate school. And then the more I did it, the more I thought, well, maybe I could make something out of this, and started looking into publishing and pursuing my career that way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, you talking about Anne Rice, I'm just curious, and I've asked a couple of other authors this before, if you could collaborate with anybody, and we're past, present, whatever, would she be the person that you would want to collaborate with?
I'd be scared to death. I met her one time for about 3 seconds. She did a book signing in Naperville, which is next door to where I live. And so I stood in line, and I mean, you talk about meeting your heroes and you never know what you're going to experience or whatever. Right. She was really, really nice. And I can't imagine in her world, she was super famous by that time. So there's hundreds of people in line, and this was not her only gig that week. I mean, she was doing a tour. And it just meant a lot to me that she understood the moment and was very gracious. And I'm way too shy to have said anything except hello or thank you or I love your writing or something like that. But I forget why I was telling you that story. But yeah, collaborations. Yeah, I would have wanted to, but it would have been so scary.
Oh, I'm sure, very intimidating, especially if you were just starting out. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't even, I would know. Same thing. I wouldn't know what to do. You said you had your PhD, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy has his PhD. I feel like such an idiot talking to you. I feel like, what impression is this guy getting from me? Because this guy's super smart,
No, he's just a normal guy, believe me.
I always feel that way, especially when, because I mean, you have your doctorate, obviously. And a few of the other authors in the HWA have their doctorates as well. So it's just like, to me, it's intimidating because, again, you don't want to come off as that person as not being, I guess, educated, so to speak.
I mean, to me, with a doctorate, it just emphasizes the more you learn and the more you know, the more you think you don't know crap. So,
or the more money you had to dish out.
Yeah,
college funds.
I think it just intensifies imposter syndrome, because the minute you step into some topic, you're like, yeah, but this, and this, and I haven't read this, and so.
Oh yeah, no, and I understand that as well. I totally understand that. So talking about vampires, the traditional, the old school vampire is, kind of like the Bela Lugosi, the Cape, the castles, Transylvania, caskets, bats, etc. It seems like, and I've read a couple of the other people that are in the HWA. They have written about vampires as well. I noticed, because I haven't read a whole lot about vampires recently. It's been a long time. But I've noticed that you guys have kind of put a spin on your vampires that, it's I guess it's more modernized, so to speak. So when I did read your story, Centuries of Longing, and I noticed all the difference, I mean, everybody has their own idea of what a vampire is. I mean, besides the traditional, but how did you break out of that traditional, I guess, I don't even know what the word I'm thinking of is, the traditional way the vampire is perceived? So how did you decide to break out of that or come up with that?
Yeah, I think, well, what's interesting, kind of as a side note here before I launch into my own personal journey with it, is that what I think vampires are having a resurgence right now.
Mhm.
There's a very cyclical nature to horror and what becomes popular. Zombies have been popular forever, maybe waning a little bit. Vampires were super popular in the 90s, early 2000s. Then they kind of started to lose favor. There's a resurgence right now in vampires. What's interesting to me is that with the resurgence, a lot of the vampires have reverted back to that kind of scary, nasty, villainous, evil creature kind of thing, which is fun that's coming back or developing anew. I think I already gave away the start to my answer in terms of my vampires, because Anne Rice introduced a new world for vampires. She wasn't necessarily the first one to do it. I think of something like Fred Saberhagen in the when was that was maybe the early 1970s. He published the Dracula tape.
Mhm.
I like to read stories where somebody flips something on its head. So he took Bram Stoker's Dracula and wrote a story, but it was from the perspective of Dracula. And suddenly you see through Dracula's eyes that not all of the evil that was perceived was actually true. Jonathan, uh, who's visiting Dracula, is drugged out of his mind and sick, and he hallucinates all of this. Anyway, he kind of said, hey, what if the vampires aren't evil creatures? And then at the same time, or around the same time, of course, Anne Rice is writing and going to publish Interview with a Vampire, and her vampires are essentially a very human world to me in terms of their personalities, because there are some vile, evil vampires in her world. There are some, very good, pure vampires in
Right.
her world. So she gave space all of a sudden and invented a world where now every author picks and chooses what their vampire world is like and how that's going to be structured. So when I started writing, by the time I started writing about vampires myself, it was a blank slate. I'm going to write about vampires. Now you have to make up the rules. What are the rules and how are they going to appear to you? So, for example, are they repelled by crucifixes? Are they injured by holy water? Well, this now gets into my history and my training as a historian, because I look at religious history and I look at how much the power of the church can be manipulated to oppress people or keep people down. So one of the first things I decided was, no, we're just going to make all that religious stuff a mythology. It's not true. I'm not going to have my vampires affected by that kind of thing. So then you have to decide, well, what can affect them? And yeah, it was just, it's this journey you get to go on. It's very liberating as an author to, you just construct your world from the ground up and decide what you want to do with them. Part of my work also is about empowering LGBTQ characters and making them the focus. So I also enjoy within that realm that my vampires are pretty powerful. They don't have to worry about money. They don't have to worry about protecting themselves. So you can set them at a time when it is not okay to be out, but they know their sexuality. And what would it have been like for people to be able to walk around and not fear all the time, right?
Okay.
That they know they're gay, they're going to pursue that. And if somebody, I mean, this is horror-ish, but like if somebody doesn't like it, well, they'll just eat them. They'll just, dispense with them. So that's one of the things I decided was, how can I empower them to get at a different truth, to get at a different way of looking at the world?
Well, and then a lot of your the main character in that story, and again, just what you had said, he goes through everyday life, just trying to get by, and he's just looking for a partner, to share his life with. So when you wrote this, were you trying to relate, to the story, or were you trying to relate to that story with your own personal experiences in life?
Yeah, I think I was, it's and again, this is really it's so much of it is the context of when I was growing up and I wasn't out until college, but there was always a part of me that thought, well, what does that mean for me? Am I going to find somebody to spend my life with, which is what I wanted, the vision
Right.
I had for my life. But you think, you're not even thinking about being able to tell other people, let alone live this like fantasy world, this
Right.
fantasy. So I definitely think that emotion, that longing, that sense of wanting something and being able to define it in your head, but maybe not like outwardly emote it, works its way into the stories that I write. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess that would be with anybody, from our own personal experiences. Um, Now this is kind of funny to lighten the mood a little bit. The main character, when he gets turned into a vampire, um, someone hands him a guide on how to be a vampire and the
Yeah.
rules and regulations.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, how awesome would that be if everybody got one, like a user's manual when you're born. So have you thought about maybe like writing one of those?
My God, I should write. In all of this, in the vampire series that I write with all my vampires, that is a major thing. There's a vampire ethic that governs the vampires. I think to some extent that's just my own personal, like, I'm a rule follower. And so I like to know that there's this structure and it's the guardrails and you kind of follow it. It
Right.
was a way to make the vampires not so like ominous and threatening. But I also then, because I'm a rule follower, I can rebel against that and kind of get angry about it. Like, I don't want to follow these rules. This is bullshit and I want to change or whatever. Um, so then I also like, okay, there's a vampire ethic. And one of my characters, Jarrett, who's the main character, he first appears in the Bachman Family Secret. And then he's in the third vampire book, The Vampire's Witch. Yeah, there it is. Um, that's where
Yep.
Jarrett first appears. He's in The Vampire's Witch. And then my most recent novel, The Vampire's War, is from his point of view. And he's really struggling in this book. I won't give anything away, but he's really struggling in this book against the vampire ethic and the rules and following the council. So it allows you to like play around with that and experiment.
It's cool. I'm looking forward to reading more of your work. Like I said, it's just for being a short story, like I said, I thought it was really beautifully written. So yeah, no, I definitely will continue to read more of your stuff. Um, as far as being an author in the LG and gosh, I'm gonna try to say this and not mess it up. LGBTQTIA plus community. Would you have any advice for any up and coming authors just starting out that may be concerned about their work not being accepted?
I mean, just not just their work, just their life. That's out there. That's part of this world. But we also live in a contemporary world that is a lot more accepting. And what I would encourage people to do is seek out those places where there is acceptance. There are a lot of venues there, like my press, Nine Star Press, focuses on queer publishing. And who would have been thought of a world where there's a press that's focused on bringing our stories, not just horror, they do a lot of different things, bringing our stories out to the rest of the world. So I think it's important to find community because you'll find that acceptance and caring. And I mean, for example, I'm very much out at the Horror Writers Chicago chapter, and the Horror Writers Association in terms of inclusivity is a wonderful organization, absolutely wonderful. Again, I don't want to ruin our stereotype of being scary and like, everything, we're going to eat you and kill you. The organization as a whole is so welcoming and friendly. So find those pockets, find those people that support you, and write. Get it out there. Do that.
That's awesome. Is there any other genre that you read besides horror? Well, and obviously besides nonfiction.
Yeah, I dabble in all sorts of stuff. If somebody throws a book at me or recommends it, my husband doesn't like horror, so he'll read a book and say, you should really read this. I'm reading oh no, I'm going to forget the author's name. I'm reading Countries of Origin right now, which is a novel about somebody having to leave the United States because he was a dreamer and has to leave because of his legal status. So yeah, I read. If I'm not reading horror, I probably read like gay fiction,
Mhm.
literary fiction.
Is
And
this it? I'm Googling.
that is it.
Oh, okay.
A great. I'm only a third of the way through it, but so far it's a great novel. It's very powerful, very well written.
That's good. I always look for book club, or I have a book club here, and I'm always looking for recommendations. So I definitely will, since it's in my search history, I'll look it up and see if something that the folks would be interested in. And like I said, that's why I always ask, like, what are you guys reading, or what are you writing, or anything like that.
Uh,
So, when you do make time to write, what preparations do you do? Like, do you have to have a quiet room? Do you have to have the radio on? The dogs outside, or do they have to be in there to
oh,
see what you're writing?
yeah,
Yeah.
they would not accept outside. Like this is the classic thing. If you're in the office and you close the door and they're in there with you, they sit at the door because they're annoyed that you've closed the door and they can't go wherever they want. But if I would kick them out of the office to be quiet and close the door, they'd be at the other side of the door, pawing at it and poking at it like, hey, what's going on? So my personal writing, I don't do music or anything. It's just quiet. I need that space to think. I'm not a multitasker. So if I'm doing something, I really focus on it and like to be all in with it. That being said, the dogs can be in there. I like to have them nearby, know what they're doing, and they interrupt all the time, and I deal with that. But yeah, otherwise, no. Once I start to write, I kind of like it to be quiet, and I just focus on what I'm doing.
That's awesome. How many dogs do you have?
Two.
Two? It's still, I think, well, even with one, but yeah, when you get two, you got trouble. It's like kids. You get two.
But it's totally like they gang
If
up on
there's, yeah, if they get quiet, there's a problem. Where are they at? What are they doing?
yeah. And then the alternative is that they're super noisy and you're like, would you shut up?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
one of
that's
them, they love to do this thing. Like if one of them is napping and quiet and the other one wakes up and is bored with that, Chewbacca in particular, he'll just go to the front door and kind of bark at nothing
Yep.
because he knows it's going to wake Mika up, and then there's going to be this like chaos around. So
My two will do the same thing, especially if they get, new toys.
oh
It'll be the
yeah.
same exact toy. You give them one each, and then yeah, the one drops it immediately and then goes after the other one, and then they rip the other one in half, and then it's like, all right,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So
I just spent $5 for your 30 seconds of fun.
yeah, I yell at my husband all the time, like, why do you do that? Get the cheap ones so they can tear it up in like 3 seconds. Buy the ones that are like a couple dollars. Don't buy these $12 ones. It's just, I don't know. It is what it is. And again, it's a whole kid thing. You do what you want, do what you love them to death, so you want to make them happy.
Right.
If it's tearing up a $12 toy, then so be it. But um, so we're just about out of time, so I have one more question for you. Um, well, actually, I have a couple of them. Can you recommend any authors to the folks out there?
I've been plugging this one for a while. If you like young adults and you like speculative fiction, darker horror-ish, but not real intense, Laurie Forrest has the Black Witch series right now, and I love it. Love it. So I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I will look into that one too. And then last but not least, when you aren't writing and you aren't teaching and you aren't being controlled by the dogs, what do you do in your free time?
What do I do in my free time? Paul and I like to drink wine, hang out with friends and talk. I would say that's our hobby more than anything, is just hanging out and chatting with people. I'm also a big Cleveland sports fan. So I follow the Browns, the Guardians, and the Cavaliers. That's supposed to be relaxing and fun, but normally it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, no, I understand. For a minute there, I thought you had a Bears jersey on, and I was just
No,
like,
this is Browns jersey.
yeah, but the colors look like the navy blue and orange, so I was just like, and again, it's punishment when you watch any of pretty much any football team anymore. But anyways, well, thank you so much for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, because I can't talk right now, But I just want to remind everybody that the Beyond the Book Festival is September 30th of this year, which is actually in 8 days. Hard to believe already. Time is flying. And then it's from, like I said, 9 to 3 Central Time. You guys come out and see Damian. And again, check out his work. These are I have not read them yet, but I have started reading him, and I have really enjoyed what I have read so far. So if you get a chance, come out, and these are available to get checked out. And then, talk to him. I'm sure he won't mind socializing. Maybe if you bring the wine, I don't know.
Right. We'll talk for wine.
Right? We'll talk for wine. We'll sign books for a box, just
Yeah.
well, again, thank you so much for joining us. And again, guys, don't forget to come on out to the book festival.